I'm sitting in my home studio here in Silver Lake in Los Angeles, and I have been very busy. We finished the recording of 5 Billion Diamonds back in November, and I mixed that in December and January. And then I went in the studio and finished recording a new Garbage record in February and March. We finished tracking that the day before LA went into lockdown. So I thought we would have that done by May 1st, but because of quarantine, the finished bits we had to get done with vocals and a few overdubs and mixing stuff all had to be done via file sharing. So that really slowed the process down. But anyway, we're done with that. I found the first month, like my head was in a fog, and I talked to a lot of other artists I think felt the same. Well, we have all this time, but everybody felt discombobulated. None of us have ever had this kind of thing happen in my generation. So, and then about a month in, probably I would say the end of April, I just got really busy and found that focusing on music was the one thing that has kept me sane. So, and besides finishing Garbage and getting the 5 Billion Diamonds album ready, I did another track with Silverspun Pickups. I did a lot of pro bono music for some political ads that were all nonpartisan, basically get out the vote. I did some tweaky stuff for Native Instruments, doing a Butch Vig drum software thing. It's like an old school drum machine that you can play on your computer. That was totally fun because it was super elaborate, tweaky, nerdy stuff with me running snare samples through all these effects plugins and stuff. But as I said, I'm lucky that I've had this space to keep working. I mean, I can't tell you how many musicians I know who make a living on touring, and that's been completely cut off from them. So this has been a really hard year.
Are you somebody who throws yourself into work when times get difficult?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I don't really have any hobbies, and if I start to sit around and think too much about the weight of the world or whatever that may be, it can get a bit daunting. So yeah, work for me is therapy. I mean, it's music. I've been doing it my whole adult life, and I just that's what I immerse myself in.
How do you get to this point in your life and not have any hobbies? Is it just that music is all encompassing for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even consider it work, really. It's what I do. I'm constantly listening to music, making music, editing music, collaborating with someone. It's what makes me tick, really. My wife keeps telling me I should get a hobby, but I don't have one yet.
And I suspect the fact that you, perhaps not evenly, but that you split your time between, being in bands and performing and producing on the other side of things is enough to keep things fresh and interesting relative to somebody who is just basically doing the same thing day in, day out.
Yeah, and you hit on a point there. I mean, I'm lucky that I'm in a band or multiple bands. I've been in bands my whole life in some form or another. And that in a sense is a really clubby little clique collaborative thing. Every band has its own unique identity, and then I can step away from that and I'm a producer, or I have to step away and be objective because I'm not the artist. I'm helping the artist get to their vision, and they're two completely different things, and I'm lucky I can flip between them. Sometimes in the same day, I'll work on some 5 Billion Diamonds music in the morning, then I'll work on a track for somebody else in the night and whatever, and I think it's good to be able to jump around like that. It keeps it fresh for me, keeps it interesting.
Obviously, when you take performance out of the equation, how different is being a producer in the studio and being a member of a band in the studio? Obviously, there's a fair amount of overlap in some of your projects.
I can be a multitude of things. I can be a songwriter, I can be a musician, not even drums. I can play keyboards or guitar or bass. I can order dinner, I can crack a bottle of wine, I can make the pot of coffee, I can argue with my bandmates. We can decide screw this, let's watch a movie. Let's turn on Netflix and watch whatever, It's different. As a producer, I have to keep my eye on getting the project done, but more importantly on sort of the mental wherewithal of the band to make sure they're focused, make sure the vibe is cool, everybody's getting along okay. Sometimes I have to coddle them and make them feel good. Sometimes I have to do the opposite and push them to get to an uncomfortable place to get a performance right. A lot of producing with other artists for me is psychological. I mean, there's a song and sonically what you want it to sound like, but then there's the psychological aspect of how do you get to that point. And so it's just a different mindset. It's harder work, actually, producing other artists from my point of view. When you're in a band, you get a lot of leeway. Like I said, I'm going to open a bottle of wine right now. Everybody okay with that? Everybody's like, yeah, do it, so, but I love splitting time between both.
What do you mean by psychological in this context? I suspect that when people go in, for the most part, bands you're dealing with, when they go into the studio, obviously the goal is to produce a record. I mean, is it like pulling teeth sometimes? Is it difficult to actually get them to, hunker down and work on the product?
Well, some bands and some artists are very motivated. They have kind of a clear idea what they want to do. Some are not, and some need to be pushed quite a bit and sometimes challenged to draw something out of them. And then there's dynamics of, if it's a band, the multiple musicians or artists in the band, because sometimes they are at odds or having friction between them. And I have to kind of get a read on how to address everybody, make them feel good about what they're doing. Yet at the end of the day, I want to get a great performance and I want the songs to sound great. So there's a lot of sort of figuring out what the dynamic is and how to talk to people and how to talk to them as a group and how to pull them aside individually as members and talk to them. And as I said, that's a lot more work.
I assume in most cases, most of the bands that you're dealing with are pretty well established or been around for a while. So they've been doing this for a while. They've been oftentimes touring in very close quarters. And then all of a sudden you have to not only figure out what to do on record, but you have to sort of figure out, I guess, just from kind of talking to them and reading them, what's been going on in their lives. And if you have to, do you feel like you're giving people homework assignments? Is it that sort of thing? Is it really just letting them know what the deadline is and making sure that a product is finished by then?
Well, I think I used to have to do that more than I do now. When I take on projects these days, when I'll sit down, and the most important thing is, first of all, to hear the music, like what does the music sound like? And then get an idea of what their vision is for this particular record or single, whatever they're working on. But then I also look around and see, okay, who's their management? What label are they on? Are they having problems in the band? Is there strife going on? Are there drug issues, whatever? And there are red flags that come up, and I honestly try to avoid those, because I've worked with some bands in the past that have an insane melodrama and were just extremely difficult to work with. And I don't want to name names, but made some great records under those circumstances, under a lot of duress, but I try to avoid that, so when I pick somebody I want to work with, I want to feel like I get an understanding of where they want to go as an artist and understand their vision, but there's also, I feel there could be some camaraderie and that it could be an interesting and possibly fun process, because being in a studio should be fun. That's why I go into studios every day. When you go in the studio and it's a drag, that is no good.
I assume that for several decades, for the most part, in a lot of these cases, it's bands or labels approaching you. Obviously, you've been established for quite some time now. What is that kind of romance process like? What is that period like when you're, really deciding whether or not you want to take this project on?
Well, it's a first date. You're kind of excited, not quite sure what to expect.
You're sitting down with the band and meeting them, talking to them in person, or
yeah. I mean, I usually have to do that. I have to sort of get to know what they're like in their psyche and sort of figure out, okay, who kind of is dealing with the bulk of the song arranging, or is there a main songwriter, or are there multiple artists? And you could figure out really quickly the dynamic in bands. You can tell the hierarchy, and rarely are bands a democracy. Garbage, I have to say, is a democracy, but we're a very dysfunctional democracy. We all produce, we all have opinions. We argue like crazy, but we also, at the end of the day, share a lot of sensibilities, so we kind of get on the same page. But a lot of bands are not that way, and so I have to sort of figure out, if I want something or I need to address an issue, who do I speak to? And that just takes a bit of, once you get past the first day, you figure that stuff out pretty quick. But there's also, like with solo artists, pop singers, hip-hop artists, whatever, there can be a lot of other people around, like friends, management, publishers, whatever. There can be a whole slew of chatter opinions that I try to sort of shut out at the end of the day. I want to really focus on what the artist is concerned with, what's important to them.
Was Garbage always a democracy, or is that something that you've settled into over time?
Well, I've known Duke and Steve for 30 plus years. You know, we've been in bands together. We lived in Madison, Wisconsin. Steve and I started a studio, Smart Studios, that was ran for almost 30 years. And when Shirley joined us, she was the outsider, but she was very much on the same page in terms of what we were trying to do sonically and just visually and how we viewed the world. You know, we share a lot of the same passions for food, books, film. You know, we're all sort of bleeding liberals to a certain extent. So that made it easy, but it took her a while, I think, to feel like she fit into our club. Once we finished the first record, she did not want to go on tour with us. You know, we made the whole record in the studio, and we decided we would go do like 6 weeks of shows, and that was it. And honestly, I thought, we'll put this Garbage record out, and then I'm going to go back to producing full time. And then the record just kaboom, took off, and we went on tour on the first record. Damn, it was 18 months, I think we went all over the world, and it was crazy cool fun, really hard work, but that really gelled us. And Shirley really grew into her own as a front person, as a lyricist. You know, she realized I'm the mouthpiece for the band, and she's really good at it too, by the way.
Do you get a sense of when it clicked from being like, this is the side project, or this is the project of the Nevermind guy, and Pinocchio became a real boy, I guess?
You know, I think it was at the end of the first album, the touring cycle. We knew we had done well, had sold a lot of copies, we'd been all over the world. We were completely exhausted. I mean, fried out of our minds. And I remember we came to, I think the last show was somewhere on the West Coast here, and we met at a hotel. I met our manager to talk about, whoa, what's happened, and sort of figure out a game plan. And almost immediately, we as a band had decided we want to start writing songs for the next record. Even though it had taken us almost a year to make the first record, and then we were gone for 18 months, all of us knew that we wanted to keep that momentum. And when we went up to start writing version 2.0, we were in this secluded house up in Friday Harbor, north of Seattle, for about a month. And that's when I realized that we're our own little band, and we're all really close, and we're all kind of on the same wavelength, and we all have a comfort now that we can talk and argue with each other, and we're all excited to keep pushing forward.
As you said earlier, it took Shirley time to kind of adjust and to figure that out. But to you and to the other guys, did it feel like a proper band from the outset? Was that the plan? Was it just a bunch of friends having fun in the studio?
Well, one of the unfortunate things that got quoted in the first record was something like 3 producers and a girl singer. And that really annoyed the shit out of me, because we worked so hard, we played so many shows, and we were working together all the time. It made it sound like we had this magic button and we just hired this singer and she sang, and then and that's not true at all. I mean, we worked harder in that first record touring and just trying to establish our identity than most bands that I know who are established and been doing it for a long time. And
an element of the story that I do like, though, is that you saw her on TV one day and were like, that's what we need. Like that's a great position to be in, to just be like, all right, that's exactly the element. This woman in Scotland, let's fly her out here and have her join the band.
Well, the funny thing is, we saw her on MTV. I think they played her band Angelfish once on 120 Minutes. They played a song called Suffocate Me, and what we liked about it is she sang really low and understated, and yet it was really intense. Unlike almost all of the grunge singers at the time, who were just screaming and trying that their passion was like, wow, going really hard. Duke and Steve and I flew over to London, and we met her at some posh hotel. Shirley thought we were staying there, so she thought we were pompous, buttheads, but we were staying at a small, nondescript place. But we just clicked that day. For about 3 hours, we talked about film and music and food and politics and books and culture and everything. Talked very little about music. Like, we'd sent her a couple of the music things we were working on, but we really didn't get into it. We just said, if you're into this, why don't you come over to Wisconsin and let's record some and see what happens. And she said, I'm up for it. And it was a really good meeting. When I left, I thought, I think she's going to be a good fit. I think it's going to work. And I went to a party with some other producers and engineers in London, and like Alan Mulder, who mixed Siamese Dream with me, and Flood was there. I sat down at this pub to have dinner, and they were all staring at me. And I was like, what's going on, you guys? And they said, have you heard the news? Kurt Cobain is dead. That happened on the same day, the day I met Shirley, and then I heard Kurt died. And so for me, it was like literally a point in my life where, okay, recording in Nirvana, led up to here, boom, I met this singer and we're starting a band called Garbage. That's like phase two. And it's a true story. I met Shirley the day that Kurt died.
It is one of those things, though. I think when I look back at my own life, I could probably count on one hand the moment, like these really cinematic moments, these moments that really just feel like a crossroads. Do you get the sense that one thing for you personally, that one thing kind of compelled you to continue on doing the other?
Well, it's funny, Garbage started from me sort of trying to walk away from alternative rock because I just got known for making these big, loud rock records. And I love doing that, but I grew up listening to all different styles of music. I didn't want to get pigeonholed. And by the time Nirvana and Smashing Pumpkins happened, I had done 1,000 punk rock records, like guitar, bass, drums. I was just sick of it. I got interested in samplers. I fell in love with Public Enemy. The records they were making were so crazy and scary and wild. I was like, how are they doing that? And it was using samplers in the studio and loops and using the mixing board as an instrument. So I started doing these remixes with Duke and Steve for Depeche Mode and U2 and Nine Inch Nails and Beck and Alanis Morissette and whatever, House of Pain. And that template is how we started the music for Garbage. So it was right around that time, meeting Shirley and starting Garbage was definitely moving into a different phase. And at the time, I thought, like I said earlier, like I would go back, we'd make a Garbage record, I would go back to producing full time. But then Garbage sucked me up for about 10 years. We made a record for a year, we'd tour for 18 months, make a record for a year, tour for 18 months. And that became the focal point of my music at that time period.
Has that been a defining characteristic of the musical projects that you embark on, that you feel like you need to learn something new in order to push yourself in a different direction?
Yeah, it's not even so much learn something new. It's just I want to feel like the process is interesting. So much of recording for me is going into the studio day to day and not knowing exactly what's going to happen. I took a lot from my professor, Badia Rahman, when I went to film school at the UW-Madison. He kept saying, it is the process. It's not the finished product. You have to be in the moment of the process because that's what art is about. And I really feel like that's why I still love going into studios. And when it starts to become predictable, or I feel like I'm just going in something I did yesterday, whatever, then I get bored with it, and I just feel like I have to do a U-turn or a detour and explore some new avenue. So, and I guess I've always felt that way.
Yeah, I suspect that a big part of that must be the projects that you pick. In order for you to continue to keep it fresh, in order for you to push yourself and try new things, you need to make sure that you're working with a pretty broad variety of different artists.
Yeah, and there's a lot of records I've done that kind of fly under the radar. I think are great, but, they don't have the sort of pedigree as Nevermind or Garbage or Siamese Dream or the Foo Fighters, whatever. The other day, I had to go pick something up for my daughter and was driving in L.A., and somehow, randomly on my phone, this track came up with this band that I produced, Never Shout Never, and the songs are so great on that record. It's dead simple pop songs with minimal production, and it sounded so good. I came home and told my daughter and my wife Beth, I goes, I haven't heard this for like 4 or 5 years, and it sounded so good. And my daughter immediately put it on and was singing all the way through the record, knows all the songs. And I was like, yeah, damn, that is a good record.
Is that a difficult process for you as somebody, again, who has been doing production for so long and obviously has been at the top of his game for such a long time? Is it, or can it be difficult for you to sort of step back and do minimal work from the production side?
It's hard for me because I like painting with layers and filling in the cracks, and I'm guilty of overproducing some records. The second Garbage record probably has too many tracks on it, but at the time, that's what we wanted to do. We deliberately wanted to fill in every little oral corner and pocket that we could, and we did. And I still think the record sounds cool. It sounds very much of that time period, but that's what we intended to do. And I have to use restraint. On the new Garbage record, we deliberately forced ourselves to strip some of the songs back. It's hard, because you get around and finishing and mixing, and I'm like, I could hear another instrument come in the second verse here, or I could hear some other texture here, and for the most part, I'm relieved to say that, yeah, we kept our mantra on the new album and did strip it back to a certain amount.
It sounds like the move from analog to digital is really kind of an embarrassment of riches, to such a point that you have to keep yourself in check.
Yeah, the digital world is amazing. I'm sitting in front of my Pro Tools rig here, but when I went back and did Wasting Light with the Foo Fighters, we did that analog on tape, and we did it in Dave's garage. And it made me realize the great thing about analog is not so much the sound, is that it's all about performance. You really have to commit to what you're doing. So many musicians know now they can do one take and it can be fixed. You can fix the pitch, fix the timing, even if something's out of tune, a guitar or whatever, you can probably fix it with a digital editing system. So it's taken away a little bit of that drive that the musicians like in the 50s, 60s, even the 70s really had to be on their A game. If you were going into a studio, you had to really play the best possible you could, or you have to sing the best as you can. And I still try to remember that, from time to time. I don't get obsessed over spending 3 weeks on a kick drum track anymore. Garbage is more likely to, if we're recording something, we'll go, hey, is that mic on back there? Just turn that on, push it over by the drum. That's fine. People think we're super meticulous about that. Not really. I'm more meticulous about, like I said, with some of the textures and things in songs, transitions, and sort of emotionally how a vocal is connected to a track. I do get obsessed with certain things every now and then, like a feel. Like I'll be listening to the drums and bass in a verse and go, something just feels weird to me on it. And then I'll start shifting. Let's shift the bass a little behind the beat and see how that feels. And I'll go, that's pretty cool. Let's shift the snare drum back a little bit behind the kick drum and see how that feels. I kind of like it. Now let's shift the bass forward a little bit and see how, stuff like that. But it's all closing my eyes and trying to just feel it versus looking at a screen and zooming in and measuring, in micrometers if it's ahead or behind. And people do that, you can analyze things using graphs and plugins, so you don't even have to use your ears anymore. But I still like to use my ears and sort of trust my gut, my sensibility.
Do you get the feeling that a producer should have a sound or a signature, or that it's important for bands to know that when they work with you, they're getting a certain kind of vibe or aesthetic?
I don't know that I have a certain sound. I guess if you compared some of the records I did in the 80s at Smart, they probably have a sound. That was probably limited to the gear we had more than anything. In the 90s, like bands like Nirvana or the Pumpkins or Sonic Youth, whatever, there was probably a certain sound in the drums or guitars. And post working with Green Day or the Foo Fighters or Garbage, I don't know. I'm not really aware of that. I like to think that Siamese Dream sounds like Smashing Pumpkins, and Nevermind sounds like Nirvana, and Dirty sounds like Sonic Youth, but I'm sure there are sensibilities I bring that probably people hear. I don't know that I can necessarily pinpoint those. It's not a bad thing, though, I guess. There are some producers, especially in the 80s, who had a signature sound, and they would put a stamp on people. And that was part of why you hired that producer, I hope that I'm a little bit more transparent than that.
I was thinking very specifically Nirvana, the difference between an album that you produce and Steve Albini, right? Like you go to Steve Albini, you have a very specific idea, I think, of what you're getting out of a Steve Albini record for the most part, or he brings something very specific to the process. Do you get a sense of when people work with Butch Vig, what they're looking to get out of it?
I'm not really sure. I do know a lot of times I spend a lot of time discussing kind of what their vision is sonically, how they want a record to sound. And I'm always just worried. I want the songs to be good and have some sort of emotional connection for an audience. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't really obsess too much over the snare drum sound or a specific bass drum sound or whatever. It's sort of more about the overall big picture. Going back to Steve, I know Steve. He's a great engineer. He won't call himself a producer, but I know I can hear his records because he loves room mics with ribbon mics with either Coles or Royers, and his studio in Chicago is incredible. I did a session there with the Foo Fighters when we were doing Sonic Highways, and I just loved that drum room that he designed. He's such a gearhead, and you put the drums in there, and they're foolproof. They sound killer, But still, I can tell his records because I know the choice of microphones he's using. It's less about the production arrangement things. I think he stays away from bringing that into the process. He'd rather the band make those decisions, and he's just making sonic decisions. He's also a wicked poker player. You want to lose your money, play some poker with Steve Albini.
I'll wonder what direction my life has taken if I wake up one morning and I'm in Chicago playing poker against Steve Albini. Like a lot of interesting decisions would have had to have been made along the way. You mentioned this with regard specifically to the second Garbage record, that it's easy to kind of pinpoint its sound in time. Obviously this can be difficult to do in the moment, but are you actively generally trying to avoid production decisions that really put something in the moment, in the way that like it's very easy to pick out an 80s new wave record because of the decisions that were made in studio?
Yeah, I mean, I can hear over the decades, I can hear just production, how it changed, records from the 50s into the 60s and the 70s. Everybody went to these dead studios in the 70s, and there wasn't very much low end. And then the 80s, they went to the really clicky kick drum with a lot of keyboards and this gigantic snare that didn't make any sense to me. So it sounds like the bass drum is a foot away from you, completely dry, and the snare is back in that church back there about 60 feet away going boom. It's like drums don't sound like that, And I can hear, once in the 90s, even prevalent these days, like a lot of the production in hip hop, I hear a lot of the same sort of keyboard sounds and drum.
Auto-tune is just like inescapable
but
now.
but that's the tools that people use. And also a lot of artists like that sound, So every sort of genre of music in every decade has kind of its own unique sensibilities, and when you're doing it in the moment, I don't know that you're aware of it, but when you get away from it like 10 or 20 years, you can go back and go, oh yeah, that's 1997 or that's 2003 or whatever. You can hear sort of specific sounds or tricks that people would do in production, but it's always going to be that way.
Well, tricks is it's an interesting way of putting it, right? Because tricks suggests, I don't know if it's necessarily a shortcut or maybe like a gimmick, kind of an active decision that's being made. Are those things that you generally try to avoid for the sake of not making something too dated? Are you conscious of whether or not you're making a record dated?
I'm not sure. I was speaking in an earlier interview today, and they were talking about the sound of the first Garbage record, and honestly, to me, that record sounds bizarre. We recorded everything on tape, and then we ran everything into samplers and manipulated it, and then sent it back to tape, except for Shirley's vocal. Although some of Shirley's vocals, we like some of the do were samples, and we just play them on a keyboard. And it sounds weird to me. I don't, it's just the process that we did it. There have been a few times where we've worked on something either with Garbage or somebody else and go, this sounds like it's just a production idea that probably will not sound so good down the line, so you try to avoid it. But it's not always easy to know that when you're in the moment. Sometimes everybody who has an idea thinks it's the greatest idea there is, and it's hard to be objective. It's hard to say no, when you're excited about something or excited about an idea.
Did that first record sound weird to you at the time? Or is that something you figured out in hindsight?
I guess it did to a certain extent, because after mixing a lot of rock records, it just had sort of a different feel and how the low end, and like a song like Vow was a mono kick and snare track with a hi-hat. It wasn't 16 tracks of drums. It was sort of just this, I came up with a loop and it played some live drums on it and whatever, but it just got printed to one mono track. There was not I couldn't turn the kick drum or snare drum up. That's the way it was, and we just decided it sounds cool. Let's just leave it the way it is. And I probably wouldn't do that now. I'd at least put the kick on one track and the snare on a separate track, so if I had to mix them up or down, I could do that. But we sort of approached that first record almost like remixing, like just we wanted to have if we found a track, we would print it all the way through, and then a lot of the songs we sort of define the arrangements by turning things off in the mix, like we'd mute things in the verse, or we'd bring things in the chorus, or in the bridge we'd mute things in. And so I guess that's one of the reasons that the record sounds sort of odd to me now. I think the record's great, but it doesn't sound like anything else at the time, And I guess that's probably a good thing and maybe a bad thing. I don't know.
I suspect that to some degree because you had, it sounds like you had absolutely no expectations for that first record or the bands when the band started. And I suspect that that's probably also the case with 5 Billion Diamonds, even though obviously you're a name and you're working with other names. Does that afford you the ability to try new stuff and to mess around with it if you have no expectations as far as whether or not anyone's ever going to hear this thing?
Yeah, and in a way, I think that's a good thing. All artists should remember that. Unfortunately, when you have a band or an artist that's got successful, there's a lot of pressure to repeat that success. And a lot of people will start bringing in their opinions. And I think I've been pretty good in the past at shutting that out. I always side with an artist. I may have managers or publishers or label people telling me to do this or do that. And I go, yeah, okay. But I try to remember why I took on a project or why I'm working with a band in the first place and try to keep that focused, if that makes any sense.
In your own specific case, when that first Garbage record is a success in the way that it was, is the pressure on yourselves to find a way to recapture that specific success?
Yeah, I mean, after the success of the first record, we wanted to take where we had left off and push it higher. We wanted to make the record bigger, more widescreen, make sure the songwriting was good, the performances were good, and wanted it to have kind of a high-tech feel. That's one of the reasons we called it version 2.0. And it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. It meant to be, here's the newest software upgrade from Garbage. And so all those were very kind of deliberate decisions that we made, but all of us felt pressure. I mean, I felt a ton of pressure making version 2.0. I kind of felt like, even making the first Garbage record, I felt like if it failed, I was going to be the one who would have to answer to it. But during the second record, during version 2.0, I think all of us felt that. And Shirley started to feel like, now that we've established ourselves, there is more pressure, to sort of live up to the standard, whatever that we had come up with on the first record. But I'm sort of used to that. I mean, I've worked with some bands where they feel immense pressure. With the Green Day following up American Idiot, a lot of pressure on them. When we went in to do the Who's Wasting Light, Dave said everybody's going to freak out because Butch Vig's working with Dave Grohl. I said, well, who cares? Let's just go make a record that we like, and that's the only thing that matters. So you have to be able to shut that sort of outside pressure out, although it'll drive you crazy otherwise.
I suspect that the pressure that Green Day felt, or the pressure that the Foo Fighters felt, was different at that point in their respective careers, right? I mean,
yeah, definitely, yeah.
When both of those albums were recorded, they had already had a fair amount of success up to that point. The pressure is very different between the first and second record.
Yeah, nobody wants a sophomore slump. In Garbage, we did not want a sophomore slump. But there's no guarantee that, you can write the best songs in the world and have the production great and have a record company behind you, but the music industry is fickle and people's tastes change. So whatever you do, you can't second guess what the public is going to want 6 months from now or a year from now. You just have to make music that you love, that you feel you can honestly go, I made this record and I really believe in it. Because if you do it for expectations of success, you're doing it for the wrong reasons.
I respect that, and certainly that's the case. A lot of musicians I talk to, a lot of musicians I have on the show are kind of at a certain level, right? There's a certain level of indie rock success, where it's like, yeah, we're doing really well for where we are. We're not really expecting to have a big radio hit, and the pressure has changed there. But again, I suspect that given your track record, given the fact that you're working with all of these big bands on major labels, I mean, there has to be some pressure in your life. There has to be some pressure for there to be success. So how do you balance, or how do you kind of reconcile those two things?
Well, when I take on a project, I kind of immerse myself in it. I'm not a good multitasker. I can't do like 3 or 4 records at once, work on this track with one artist, listen to a mix here, do some songwriting here. I have to sort of get into it so I feel like it's becoming part of my DNA and really understand the songs and the performances. And I'm aware of how the band is perceived or the artist is perceived. So there are certain decisions I may lean to if I think it could help a song sound better or whatever, but if it feels like it's untrue to the artist, then I won't do it, So, and part of that pressure is from A&R people saying, oh, we need back vocals in the chorus, or you need to put a string section in here. And it's so idiotic for people to say it. You can say that about any song you can hear and go, let's put strings in the bridge, whatever. I'm saying that with a really fakey British accent, by the way. It's terrible. So you just have to kind of be able to look at it objectively and try to remember what the vision is that the band wants, and just do the work at it and try to make the best record you can.
One of the things that I've realized in life is that most people spend most of their time at their jobs justifying their jobs to other people. And I suspect that like A&R people maybe specifically, or, some other label people, they're kind of like, oh, by the way, like this is, I'm the guy who suggested backing vocals to Butch for this record, and I assume in a lot of cases it just must be suggestions for suggestions' sake.
Well, it's funny you say that because, sometimes the bigger the artist, or not even artist, like you talk about TV or film, there's so many people, so many executive producers and whatever. I've gotten calls from people who give me suggestions, and when I've been working on music for a film, I don't even know who they are, And they go, we need you to do this and this. And I go, okay, well, did the director want that? Well, the producer wants it to be this way. I'm like, okay, whatever. That's a different thing with film and TV, because ultimately, if I'm involved with making the music, it's not my music, it's not my band, it's theirs. So I understand that. But when people start doing that with artists, I feel like they're treading on thin ice, because it's at the end of the day, it's the artist who has to answer to the failure or success of that work. The people who are giving you opinions, they are probably trying to justify their job. And as I said, the bigger the corporation, the more people who seem to be floating around. You're never quite sure what they do. But you sort of have to be able to figure that out, figure out who to avoid and who to trust. I worked with this one band. I don't want to say who they were, but their manager was an incredible meddler. He just micromanaged everything. Like I'd be in the studio till like 2. I'd be dead asleep. The phone would ring at 7. Butch, I need to talk to you about this. And oh man, okay, blah, blah, blah. And then after a while, the band started saying, oh man, I'd say your manager's coming by. They go, oh, not the vibe crusher. And the band would be calling their manager a vibe crusher. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to try to avoid him as much as I can.
Do you have opportunity to work with younger artists? Do you have opportunity to work with people like really when their careers are just starting out?
I do, but most of it's been just giving them feedback, listening to songs, talking about production and things. And I like doing that. If I feel like if I can help them in some way and they want to send me tracks to listen to. And I haven't taken on that many new artists like in the last 3 or 4 years.
Do you get a sense of why?
I feel like every time I'm busy. Like Garbage has been touring a lot over the last 3 or 4 years. We just finished a record, and I sort of have to have a big chunk of time and to commit to a project like that, unless I'm doing like a track, a track or two versus doing a whole record. But I like getting involved with people. I do it actually all the time. I'll get a call and say, well, you listen to this song, and can I talk to you about the arrangement or what you think I need? And I find that interesting, because then it also allows me to hear something and be pretty objective about it, because I'm not that involved in the process. I can listen and go, well, I love this. In fact, sometimes I'll hear a track and go, I don't know what I would do with this. This sounds so good, you shouldn't F it up. Just properly mix this and get it out. And they'll go, thanks, that's all I needed to hear.
Sometimes it's nice to just have somebody who knows what they're talking about tell you that you're on the right track or doing the right thing. That pressure that we're talking about, the pressure that you felt with Garbage initially, obviously there's a lot of bands that are just like side projects, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, or just a project of this producer or musician. In the case of something like 5 Billion in Diamonds, is that a case where pressure exists in the same way for that project to be successful, or at that kind of project at this point in your career, is it something that you feel like you could just kind of have fun with?
Well, 5 Billion in Diamonds is definitely a labor of love. I started the band with 2 of my good friends in the UK, and it came out of our love for film music and obscure 60s and 70s like psychedelic folk rock albums, John Barry, his scores, Dario Argento. And we initially were just writing music, and then when we had a bunch of the tracks on the first record, we decided, let's bring some singers in, see what we can do with these. And that was a bit of a daunting process, because we didn't have a clear vision, and it took a while to get the singers who we asked on board to find their way to fit, how they fit into a song. And when we're done with the record, even while we were promoting it, when it came out, we already had started writing music for this record, for Divine Accidents, and writing songs tailor-made for each singer. Like Andy and I write most of the music. James Grillo is not a musician, he's a DJ, and he's got a massive record collection. He's got like 20,000 pieces of vinyl or something. And he's very opinionated. And in some ways, he sort of steers the band sonically, in terms of what should be in a song and arrangement. But it's very much a labor of love. All the musicians who we have brought on board, we want to feel like we have some connection with them. There are people who we thought about bringing on board to sing and realized we don't want to work with vibe crushers. We don't want to work with bummers in the studio. The band is so much fun. Making the record is fun. All the musicians, we give them a lot of leeway, whether it's the rhythm section or Al on guitar or Damien from the Undertones on guitar, and all the singers, and everybody loves that. I mean, I think they like being part of the process, that it gives them a chance to sort of spread their wings and try things that they maybe wouldn't be able to do with another band.
Garbage has been around for a long time, and the musical environment, let's just say, has like shifted quite a bit since the early days, in terms of radio, things like that. At this point in the band's career, is there pressure to have success in the same way that, I assume that that's changed to some degree over the years?
I think after our first 4 records, when we took a break, and we all thought it would be like a year off or so, it spilled into whatever 6 or 7 years it was before Not Your Kind of People came out. When we put the last couple records out, Strange Little Birds and Not Your Kind of People on our own label, we didn't feel beholden to anyone. We could pick the single, we could sequence the record, we could put exactly the songs we wanted on there. I think we realized that we were lucky to have found an audience when we did, because our fans sort of allow us to do what we want to do, and a lot of them are going to come out and see us when we play live. Obviously, we don't sell CDs anymore like we used to, but we still, we have a huge fan base that really loves what we do, and we're very, very appreciative of that. But because of that, they let us sort of get away with murder. We just kind of do our own thing, and I it's the best thing in the world to be able to do that. Any pressure that comes from the 4 of us, arguing amongst ourselves, like, what should it sonically sound like? What are we trying to say? What is Shirley's lyrics? Where's she going with this? And that's cool, because when it's done, it's been birthed by the 4 of us, and then we just put it out there with no expectations. There are people who are going to hear the new record and hate it. There are people who I think are going to love it. And for better or for worse, it sounds like garbage.
Everybody has their own side projects. Everybody has their own lives now. I know you've got kids. I assume a lot of them have kids. But is there always an expectation that there is going to be another record?
I usually think that. It's like I'm going to keep making music until I can't. And like I said, I don't have any hobbies. There's nothing else to do. So I also, when I finish a record, I don't really sit around and listen to it. It takes me about 6 months to get away from it, and if I hear it again, I go, oh, I can appreciate the songwriter, or the production, or whatever. I've already moved on to the next thing, and I think a lot of artists are that particular way. They move forward. You're always looking to something to do next. Not too many musicians I know sort of sit around and pat themselves on the back after they finish something. It's like they're constantly restless in terms of trying to figure out where they're going to go next.
You have the sense that for as long as you're able to make music, and for as long as the rest of the band is able to make music, that Garbage is going to continue to record new records?
I think so. We may be heading out on stage in wheelchairs, but damn it, we're going to do it.